Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Playing World of Tanks. I'm AJ, and today we'll be looking at a couple of games I had in my 113, which is the Chinese Tier 10 heavy tank. Now, the 113 is a very decent tank. It has very good frontal armor, very decent turret. Its gun is, relatively good for what it's supposed to do, and it is very, very difficult to pick off if it's placed in the correct spot. Now, the downside to playing this tank is it's minus 4 degrees of gun depression. There's actually not much I dislike about this tank, minus the fact that its gun depression leaves something to be desired. I would not suggest this tank if you're relatively new to World of Tanks. It requires quite an extensive knowledge of how maps play for you to sort of like appreciate what this tank can and cannot do. So on Kharkov, which is, I don't think I mind playing on this map, I decided to sort of like figure out what needs to be done. Initially, I thought I was going to brawl in the middle with my 113, but then I kind of like decided, you know what, this flank looks like a little bit thin, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and try to help them out. And so the next couple of minutes, you'll just see me like trying to get into a spot where I can put my gun to good use. Another drawback for the 113 is it's extremely long, and you don't realize that until you are trying to hide behind a building and somebody has your rear axle because it was showing from the other side. Now I come over here thinking that the tanks that were spotted over here will try to push. They actually are just gonna sit there, and so what I decide to do is I'm gonna go and sort of like cut them off in the middle for the T4E4. And I don't know what he was doing. He just kind of like sees there's tanks and he still goes out and takes a shot against TDs who very easily pick him off. And so I'm here back in the middle where I started. The AMX that was down here got picked off. I didn't look who actually picked him off, but I was guessing it was a combination of 254E1 and Object 268 which picked him off. Now the E50 is just sitting still, which means it makes it very easy for me to pick his turret out in the distance, which is probably the weakest spot on his armor, and just like pummel him to death. He comes back out again. I see his turret again and gets penned again. So if you're driving the E50 and E50M, which more or less have the same armor layout, your turret is probably the weakest spot on your armor, and so you should be careful what you're trying to do once you're trying to put those tanks in the correct spot. So now I see there's an Object 268 in the distance. The T54E1 tries to put one shot into me, tries to put a second shot into me, and the third one is eaten by my tracks. I thought I would bounce him, but he was unfortunately firing APCR, which is kind of hard to bounce unless you're angled correctly. At first I decided to sort of like angle to sort of like pick him off, but the T54E1 decides, while I was sort of like maneuvering to sort of like get into position, he decides to charge me, and now I know he's out of shells, and I can basically just chase him down and basically kill him, because this is what the autoloaders are good at. If you are not if you're at a distance and you can comfortably pick off tanks that have or in a little to no HP, you can get away with it. But a T54E1, you cannot just run away from a fight if you're out of ammunition. I decided to track the 268, but his repair kit wasn't used, so I decided to back off and pick off his track again. And as I'm angling, he fires heat round into my tracks, which I easily sort of like bounce. And I know it will take just one more shot to sort of like finish him off, because I had help just arrive in the nick of time and reduce him to pretty low health. Now the rest of this game is relatively straightforward. I'm just gonna drive around and pick off what little tanks are remaining on the map. I think I drive around this corner and the T-34 shows up, and right in between the crossroads with where people have perfect shots on his side, and before he can like get back into cover, he gets picked off. So I mean, going on still about the 113. If you're new to this game, please don't pick up this tank. It will be a nightmare for you. It is a very hybrid tanks are more difficult to play just because they can do both things, and you have to sort of like read situations and analyze when you can be a heavy tank and you cannot be a heavy tank, as opposed to tanks that are like mediums or heavies, or TDs who can do one thing and one thing very well. Now, Zephyr is another interesting map. I like how it's currently laid out. It's much more straightforward than was before. Now, if I on this map always try to secure the 09 line, that is the most important flank. You will notice a lot of players who have decent stats generally tend to gravitate towards that flank, and that's precisely the same reason. And if you want to know the explanation behind it, it's because like if you control that line, you control more than half the map. Because if you, for example, like if you secure the 1-2 line, you can come through that corridor, but then again you don't really have any firing lines into the middle, except for that one spot. And if you get like spotted there, you get instantly picked off because there's so many avenues of fire up into that little space in which there doesn't exist that giant cliff. Now I try to rush this corner, which is basically in my opinion the most important part on this flank. And the Lorraine puts two good shots into me, but I have help and he doesn't. And that's why in a Lorraine you should never be the frontline tank, is because it just makes it so easy for tanks with even decent armor and decent penetration to pick you off. Now we realized at this point, I was still sort of like hesitant because I did not know what would be around this flank, but apparently they sent just a Lorraine on this flank, and kudos to the poor Lorraine. He decided he tried to do what was right. But unfortunately at this point you just have to let the flank be. I mean, going by yourself on the flank, when your team isn't going to be there, this is not going to do anything for you. You're just going to die by yourself, and you're going to be better about it because your team didn't back you up. So I mean, the Lorraine should have just run away. I mean, that would have been the smarter thing to do, but he tried to do the right thing, and and he kind of like paid with his tank for it. Now I see this T-34 in the distance. I'm trying to like gauge how far, or since I have a really small view of that tank, like I'm trying to figure out where's the best place to sort of like hit him. And this shot makes me just love it a little bit more every day. I mean, this gun is not that accurate, but like when it needs to be, it is terribly accurate. Now over here I see a T-20 prototype in the distance, and I know I have more than enough penetration to go through his front, because it seems like it's on angle towards where I'm sitting, but the gun decides, what it wants to do is just track him. Now I destroyed the shed that was in front of me expertly, and before I can reload, the T-28 gets picked off by multiple tanks relatively quickly. There's a T-95 in front of me now, Type 62, and there's a Lurway somewhere in the distance. And at this point I kind of realized that our flank is about to fall, that is on the 1-2 line, and now you'll see the reason why this flank is more important than the other one. Now one thing that you want to keep in mind is when they actually rush for your cap, you do not have to sort of like go and engage them close up. If you position some tanks, you just have to position a couple of tanks around them, and that's about it. That's about all the tanks you need to pick them off. So the AMX kind of like realizes the same thing. I realized the same thing. I decided to go through the middle to sort of like reset, but I get spotted, and I don't want the chance like going through the middle and getting shot at by all those tanks that are in our cap. And plus I realized I might not have enough time to do it anyways, so I need to like make up my decision like super fast. Now the AMX goes on the high ground behind me, and I'm gonna go on the low ground in front, and try to get as many resets as we can between us. And AMX resets the E100, he resets the 704, The E100 fires in his general direction. I don't know whether the pen, the 704 is the easier shot I fire, but unfortunately for the troll side armor, I do not pin. Now I'm rearing to take another shot. The E100 spots me. I fire, and he fires, and unfortunately for me, I was not able to bounce that heat round. Maybe I should have angled a little bit more. But now I decide to bring most of my tank behind this little ridge, and you know, the E100 is still gonna try and like fire at me, because you see that explosion right in front of me. That was a heat round that the E100 thought he had a shot on me. Now the 704 gets picked off, and the E100 goes on the other side off the rock. And right now I'm not interested if I don't have easy shots on him. I see a KP4 in the distance, and you know, I fire and set him on fire. And you know, this, I don't know what our tanks are doing. You know, there's no reason to sort of like rush the E100. He's kind of like stuck behind a rock. I mean, what is he going to do? But I think we get overconfident at this point, you know, and I'll start trying to rush the E100. I decided to, it was not trying gold rounds at the E100, so I decided, you know, try to aim for his lower, sort of like his lower plate, but it's not as easy to pin as it sounds. The E100 picks off one of our tanks. You know, the M103 didn't connect with one of his shells, and that will kind of cost him his life, because in a very few seconds he will reload and he's gonna pick off the M103. Now the E100 was perfectly angled towards me, but then right now he gives a little bit too much of his side towards us, and that allows us to sort of like pick him off in relative ease. Now the enemy light tank, who's been a nuisance, gets picked off over here. We know there's only 2 tanks remaining, an IS-7 and a Lurve. I see where the IS-7 is. You know, I fire a shot, but only managed to track him. In hindsight, I think I had heat loaded. I mean, that's not the most appropriate round if you're firing into the side of a IS-7. So I fire another shot. This time I do connect. The AMS-5100 decides to go after the IS-7, but then he kind of realizes he doesn't have the hit points to sort of like take him on. I tried to fire at the Lurve, but he starts backing off at the last moment. Now, you know, the IS-7 is kind of surrounded. You know, the IS-7, I tried to fire on the move. I could have like slowed down and taken the shot, and maybe that's one of the bad things I did. I thought I was angled enough, but apparently he goes through my front wheel spot. You know, he just pens me with relative ease. I put one more shot into the IS-7 and try to get behind him, because, you know, it will leave him to little to no chance. And that's all she wrote for him. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to rate and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode of World of Tanks.